Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with the first update for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. This is a project that I started earlier this year, and it's basically just a way for me to get use out of my eyeshadow palettes. My ultimate goal in this project is to kind of downsize my collection. I want to get to know my palettes better, and I also want to stop my purchasing. So I do have a couple parts to this project. I do have a low buy for eyeshadows, and I also have like a usage thing where I use my palettes. So I'm going to go through the palettes that I've been working on over the past couple of weeks, as well as the eyeshadow points that I was able to collect in the month of January. And yeah, you talk you through everything. So before I jump into the video, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So like I said, if you're new to this project, I would recommend checking out the introduction because I cover everything in details there. But this project has two main parts to it, which is an eyeshadow usage where I select 3 palettes per month and I use each palette per 1 week. So it's 1 week, 1 palette. And for that week, I have to create a minimum of 3 looks exclusively with that palette. And then obviously if I incorporate that palette in other looks too, that's great. But minimum 3 looks with those palettes. And I will also share with you those looks today. So the 4th week of the month is always going to be my Project Level Up palette. So, you know, I will go through that palette too with you guys and show you the looks. But I won't show you the progress because obviously I'm saving that for my Project Level Up video. But that will also be included in here. So that's kind of my first part. And also after I use every palette, I rank that palette, give it a certain score to help me narrow down what palettes I like most in my collection. And then the second part of the video is, like I said, an eyeshadow beauty bank, which I'm very heavily inspired by Laura from Laura Force. She kind of collects points and I do them in a similar way. And for every 10 points, I'm allowed to buy 1 singular eyeshadows. So yeah, I will go through that later on in the video. So those are the main 2 parts. But another kind of part that is, I guess, more included in the first half of the video is also another project which is called Expand Those Pans, and that was created by Dora. I will also have her link down below with her project. But basically that is just kind of continue using eyeshadows that already have pan in them and expanding those pans, and I've chosen to use those eyeshadows 5 times. So that is all the kind of, I guess, details that I need to go through before I get into the meat of the video. But I'm going to start, like I said, with my 1 week, 1 palette section and go through with you the looks that I made for each palette. So for the first week of the year, I worked on this palette right here, which is the Natasha Denona Mini Nude palette. So with this palette, I made 3 looks with it, and it's a really nice palette. It's a really, really good one. I brought this one with me to Sweden because I was in Sweden over Christmas and New Year's. So it was a really, really good palette to start the year off with because I could just bring this one for the first couple of days of the year. So let me go through the 3 looks I made with this palette first, and then we're going to talk you through what I ranked this one. So the first look we have right here is, I mean, all of these are going to be very everyday eye looks, but this one here is one where I used 3 of the shades. I used the shade Coin, which is the second one in the palette, which is like a light transition shade. I used this one both in my crease and then on my lower lash line. All over my lid, I used the shade Bronzer, which is the first shade in the palette, which is just like a nice bronzy shade. And then for my inner corner, I used the center shade, which is called Lumino. So I used that on both my inner corner and my inner lid. So I created like a halo eye with this look. And I really, really like how this came out. It was a really simple look. And nice for every day. So the second look that I made was a little bit smokier, and it's this one right here. So I again used the shade Coin in my crease and to blend out. But then I also ended up putting Soil, which is the deepest shade in the palette, which is the 5th shade in the palette. I ended up putting that on my crease as well and out the corner, as well as blending it into the outer half of my lid. On my lid, I ended up putting the shade Sienna, which is the 4th shade in the palette. It's like a bronze with a slight green shift to it. So I put that one all over my lid. And again, I added Lumino, that lightest shade, in my inner corner. And that was the second look. For day 3, I again created quite a simple look. I actually ended up using all of the 5 shades in the palette this day because I wanted to create a look with all 5 shades. So again, I ended up adding Coin into my crease, which is the lightest transition shade. I added Soil in the outer corner, which is that deep brown shade. On my lid, I added Sienna, which is again that kind of bronzy with a green shift kind of shade. Then on my inner lid and in the corner, I again used the shade Lumino, which is the lightest shade. And then the last shade in the palette, the Bronze Edge, I used underneath my lower lash line. So that's how I used the whole palette in one singular look. So those were all of the eyeshadows that I used for my 3 looks 1 palette. And then also quickly before I wrap up like the usage on this palette, I'm just going to tell you the tallies for each shadow because I did use some of these afterwards as well. So the shade Bronze Edge here I used twice, Coin I used 4 times, I also used Lumino 4 times, Sienna I used 2 times, and then Soil back here I used 3 times. So those are the tallies for this specific palette and all of the looks that I made with this one. So that was my first palette, and I'm going to move into the ranking for this one. I have 4 different categories that I rank, so I'm going to go through them. The first one is color story, and I gave this one a 3 out of 5 on this kind of level. I think it's a good everyday kind of palette. It has a difference in depth. It both has some lighter shade and deeper shades, both for shimmer and mattes, but it just lacks creativity, and that's kind of why I ranked it 3. For the next ranking, which is versatility, I gave this one a 1. Most looks turn out the same. They're very, very simple looks. And yes, it's an easy palette to use, but it's not very versatile, which is why I ranked it 1. For the quality, I gave it a 4. It's very, very blendable shades. It's good pigmentation and the shimmers are opaque. The only thing why I didn't rank it a 5 is because I wish that the shimmers were a little bit more sparkly, but that's fine. So I gave it a 4 in that kind of ranking. For the last ranking, we have my personal ranking, and I gave it again a 4. Again, I think it's a good everyday palette, and the quality is really, really nice. The only thing for me is that I'm missing that something extra, and that's the only reason why, again, I gave it a 4 rather than a 5. So if you tally all of that up, that means I gave this palette a 12 out of 20. So that is the final ranking for my mini nude palette from Natasha Denona. So that is the first palette that we're going to talk about. The second one that I used for the second week is this one right here, which is my Odensai Christmas Eve palette. So this one looks like this. It's a really, really beautiful color story. So let me talk you through the looks. So for the first look, I ended up doing this look right here, and I used Night Sky, which is a deep kind of green shade on my outer corner. In my crease and lower lash line, I used the shade Just Now, which is again a green, but it's a lighter kind of toned green. Then to blend out that green, I used a very, very tiny amount of Lemon Tart, which is a yellow matte, and I used end up blending that out and just create a little bit more of a gradient. For my lid, I ended up going for one of the multi-chromes in the palette, and that is the shade Gorgeous, and it's super, super nice. It goes from like a pink to a purple to a blue to a turquoise to a green. Yeah, so I really like this one and how it popped with the greens. On my inner corner, as well as on my inner lower lash line, I used the shade Wonderful, which is more of a lighter tone purple. So I used that one quite a lot as well, but on the inner part of my eye. Then on my very, very inner corner, I topped that shade a little bit with the shade Snowflake, which is just like a light kind of sparkly silver. And that is the first look. For day 2, I wanted to create a more of an everyday kind of look, and I went for like these mustardy tones. So I started off with the shade Softly, which is again a mustardy kind of browny green, and I use this one on my crease, on my outer corner, as well as my lower lash line, so it is my main matte. But again, I used the shade Lemon Tart to slightly blend that out in my crease. On my kind of outer lid, I used the shade Feeling Time, which is more of a kind of yellowy bronze shade. I really like that one. Then on my inner 2/3 of my lid, as well as my inner corner, I used the kind of light gold shade in the palette called Snow Light. And that is my second look. I really like that you can get some more kind of neutral looks with this palette too. And I really like how this one turned out. So for day 3, we did more of a colorful look again. And this is more of a blue look. And I really, really like how this one turned out too. So first up, I used the shade Nightfall, which is a light kind of blue shade in my crease and my lower lash line. I ended up adding the shade Ice Crystal, which is a gray, and in my kind of blending out area to blend out that blue. Then I ended up adding a really deep kind of navy blue in my outer corner, as well as deepening the crease slightly, and that shade is called Christmas Eve. Then for the shimmers in this look, I added the shade Blue Star, which is a really, really intense navy shimmer all over my lid. And then I topped that on my inner third lid with the shade Blue Eyes, which is like kind of like a lighter sky blue shimmer. And I also used that one on my lower lash line. And then finally, I used the shade Snowflake again, which is a light silver shade in my inner corner to finalize that look. And that is the third and final look for this palette. So on top of using those 3 looks, I did also actually make a quick look, which I didn't film, with 2 of the shades in here, which I had left to use. So the only 2 shades that I had left to use in this palette was the shade here called Slivery Dream, and then the shade Nowhere, which is this one here, and those two made a really, really nice cool tone look as well. So that is the final look that I did, but again, I didn't film that one. So a lot of the shades in this palette I only used once, but a couple of them I used twice. I'm just going to cover the ones that I could use more than once, and then the rest you know that I used once, because I did end up using this one No Pan Left Behind as well. But the ones I used more than once is the shade Snowflake here. I used it twice. We have the shade Snowlight right here, which I also used twice. Then we have the shade Lemon Tart, which is this one here, which I also used twice. And then again, the rest of the palette I used once. So that is the second palette, and let me go you through the ranking with this one too. So for the first ranking, we have Color Story, and my note says that I think this is a really, really creative and unique color story. It looks very blue at first glance. When I first looked at this palette, I thought it was a very blue leaning palette, but there's just so much more to it. You can create like those warm kind of mustardy looks, more cool tone looks, colorful looks, neutral looks, and I really, really love this. It's such a nice color story that I feel like you can mix and match a lot of different ways. So I gave that one a 5 for that kind of category, if I didn't say that already. For versatility, I also gave this one a 5. Again, I said you can make so many different looks. You can make more like colorful looks, more wearable looks, more warm tone looks, cool tone looks, and it's just a lot of variety with this palette. Honestly, with this palette, I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to make way more than 3 looks, and as you can see, I did do a 4th look as well. But there was way more kind of combinations that I wanted to try out. So I didn't really want to put this palette down, which is a really, really good telltale sign. And yeah, that one, again, is 5 for that because I think it's really versatile. For the quality, I gave it a 4. The shimmers are amazing and sparkly, and the mattes are mostly blendable. I would say they're not perfect, but overall it's a really good palette, which is why I gave it 4. Then finally, for my personal ranking, I also gave it a 5. I am really happily surprised. I know this one got rave reviews before, but I really loved using it. And again, I didn't want to move on from it after the week ended. So again, I had to give it a 5. It's a really, really nice palette. And with that, it means that I gave this one a whopping 19 out of 20 points, which ranks it currently the highest out of all the palettes that I tried so far. So for the third and final palette that I chose myself, we have the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. So this palette right here is the only one that I currently had a pan in already. So I only had one pan in this palette, but this is the one that was included in my Expandos pans. I'm just going to cover that one quickly. And since I only have one pan in this palette, it is this one here. I had to start using this one. And my goal with this one was to use it 5 times. And I'm happy to say that I was able to use it 5 times, which I'm really, really pleased with. But after that, I'm going to go through the looks with this palette. So let me start with look number 1. So the first look I did was like more of a pink leaning look. And I started off with putting Cherished in my kind of crease and blending out area. And then I put Happiness in my direct crease, as well as my lower lash line, which is slightly deeper pink. I also felt like it wasn't really deep enough, so I did put the shade Serenity to deepen up the crease a tiny bit more. And then I ended up putting the shade Joy, which is a pink shimmer, all over my lid. To make it a bit more sparkly and interesting, I put the shade Moon Magic on the inner 2/3 as like a topper shade. So that is kind of the sparkle that you see. And lastly, I put the shade Self Love on my inner corner, which is more of a kind of iridescently pink shimmer, which I really like. So those are the shades that I used in the first look, and again, that was more of a pink leaning look. For the second look in this palette, I did this one right here, and I started off by putting the shade Radiate in my crease and as well as my lower lash line. This is going to be more of a cool tone look, and this is more of a taupe kind of shade with a slight pink kind of undertone to it. Then I ended up putting the shade Precious, which is slightly deeper and slightly more gray leaning on my lower crease. And then I put the shade Mantra on my outer corner, and that's kind of the main mattes in this look. For the shimmers, I put the shade Abundance all over the lid, and I topped the inner lid with the shade Energized, which is again a really stunning kind of cuter shade. For the center of the lid, I again ended up using more of the topper shades, and I used the shade Blissful this time to top off the center of the lid. And then for the inner corner, I used a mix between the shade Moon Magic as well as Self Love to create that kind of shade. So that is the second look. Then for the third and final look, which is a very, very simple look, I ended up only using 3 shades, and the 3 shades I used are the first 3 in the palette. I used the shade Gratitude in my crease, the shade Aura in my outer corner, and then the shade Quartz, which was also my focus shade in this palette for my Expandos pans, all over my lid, and that is that look. I do believe I did include in a corner shade from a different palette in this look as well. Not sure if that's in the footage or not, but I did add that afterwards. So that is the final look with this palette. So again, for the palettes with this palette, I used most of the shades once, apart from a couple, which I'm going to go through first. So of course, the course here, I already told you I used 5 times, so that was the most used eyeshadow out of this palette. Then I used the shade Moon Magic twice, which is the shade here, and then I also used the shade Self Love twice, and the rest of them, again, I used once. But again, I reached for all of the palette, which I'm really happy with. Those 3 shades I did not reach for in the 3 looks that I made, but I did reach for those remaining 3 shades later in the week, so I did complete this one as well, no pan left behind. So for my ranking of this palette, for color story, I put 5. I think it's a beautiful color story for a cool toned look. There's a good mix of textures and undertones, although a lot of them are pink leaning, but overall I think it's a really, really pretty color story. For versatility, I put 3. It has good versatility again when it comes to textures and somewhat undertones. There's a few warmer shades in the palette, which is the ones I used in the 3rd look, but a lot of them are more kind of pure grays as well as mauves and pinks. So this palette still gives a lot of mainly cool tone looks, but I still think it's, you know, it does have like the undertone difference in the cool tone looks as well, but it's not the most versatile thing, which is why I gave it 3. For quality, I gave this one a 5. I put in my note that this has the most beautiful shimmers and some of the best sparkly mainstream eyeshadows that I've seen. The mattes blend really well and you can build depth, and all around it's just a high quality palette, so I gave it a 5. Then finally, my personal rating for this palette, again, I gave a 5. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection, especially for a cool toned palette. And that's mainly because of the undertones of those cool tone shades, because even though they are cool tone, they're a bit more kind of rosy leaning, which I really like. And also with those sparkly shades, I really, really love this palette. You know, I do love a romantic look and I do love a sparkly look, so this palette is right up my alley, and that's why I gave it a 5. So for the ranking, this one got an 18 out of 20, which again is really, really high. Then the final palette that I've been working on over the past month is my Project Level Up palette, and that was is my Urban Decade Soul Vibes palette. So this one rolled in for my level 1, and I've been using this one for the 4th week of the month. I use this one 3 looks, 1 palette, as well as just focusing on it. Of course, I use this one more as well because it is my Project Level Up, so I do have to take the pan as well. But again, this was my focus week when I use this one mainly exclusively. So I won't show you what the palette looks like, but I will insert a just photo here so you can see what it looks like quickly. And then let's just go through the looks. So first look that I made was this one right here, and I used the shade Antidote, which is a light peach shade in my crease as a blending out shade. And below that, I used the shade Hex, also in my crease. I used the shade Meditate, which is one of the shimmers, it's like kind of like a pinky purpley shimmer. I used that all over my lid. Then for like the inner part of my lid, I topped that off with Vibes, which is also like a kind of purpley leaning shade. It's slightly lighter and slightly more purple than the other one. And then I used the shade Good Karma as like a cleaning up shade in my kind of brow bone, as well as on my inner corner, and that's just like a light kind of pale bone shade. The shade that I used lastly is the shade Raw Energy, which is a purple shade, and I used that one on my lower lash line. So that completes the first look. For the second look, we have that right here. I used the shade Third Eye on my outer corner, in my crease, as well as on my lower lash line, which is actually a satin shade, but it's like the more kind of cool toned kind of satiny or matte shade in here. The rest of them are quite warm toned. Then I use the shade Good Karma, which is again that bone shade, to blend that out and make it more kind of just blended. On my lid, so all over my lid, I use the shade Ojo, which is a blue shade. And then I use the shade Opal Aura in my inner corner, which is like a bluish silver kind of shade. And that is this look here. Mainly like a blue look, but yeah, with more kind of neutral mattes. The final look that I did, which is probably my favorite if I remember correctly, is this look right here. In this one look, I used the shade Hexed in my crease as well as in my outer corner, which is a warm-tone kind of brown shade. On top of that, I used the shade Bloodstone, which is kind of like a blue-green shifting pigment. I really, really love this one, and I used that one all over my lid, like I said. Then in the center of my lid, I topped that with like a more vibrant green in the palette called Jade. I put that to just give a pop to the look as well as bring out the green. And then finally, I used the shade Antidote to blend everything out again. So that is the final look. Since this is my Product Level Up palette, I won't go through the usage in this palette because I will save that for my Product Level Up update. So I will go through all the uses there as well as what the palette looks like today. But that is the 3 looks at least I did with this palette. So for color story, I actually rated this one a 2. So my note says, it's some nice individual colors, but I feel like the mattes didn't go a lot with the shimmers. So I feel like, yeah, I think the shimmers are really stunning. I think that's the highlight of the palette, but yeah, there's not very much variety in the mattes. And I feel like, for example, like with the blue look, there wasn't really anything that I wanted to pair with the blues. That shade, the satiny shade, is the closest to them because it's slightly more cool tone leaning, but otherwise it's just warm kind of crease shades with like a lot of different shimmers, and a lot of the shimmers are cool tone as well, so I feel like it's some sort of like disconnect there with the color story, so I only gave it a 2. For like a similar reason, for versatility, I did like a 3. I wrote you can get a lot of different like pop of colors looks where you have like, again, more of a kind of neutral crease and a pop of color, but it still feels very everyday. You can't go fully like colorful, and I feel like a lot of the looks turn out quite similar because you have so little variety in the mattes. For quality, I put a 3. I said I feel like some of the shimmers are fantastic, but some of them are less sparkly, and that might be because of the age. I actually got this palette handed down to me, so it might be, you know, they might have performed better from the start, but right now the quality just isn't there for some of them. However, other ones are absolutely amazing. And I said that the mattes perform okay, not my favorite, not my like least favorite, they are just okay. And then finally for this palette, for personal ranking, I gave it again a 3. I said I like this palette, but I don't love it. Some shades in here are beautiful, but I was quite happy to put this palette away after the 3 looks. So that is kind of my final ranking, and that gives me this palette a ranking of 11 out of 20, which is not the best, but you know, that is where it falls. So that is the 3 palettes that I was working on over the past month. I'm going to introduce you to the 3 palettes that I'm introducing for next round, and obviously for the Product Level Up palette, I'm going to roll that at my update. So that's coming in a couple of days. But before I jump into those palettes, I'm going to talk you through the beauty kind of budget part of this video. So for the kind of beauty budget points, I have a couple to get through. So first up, we have no pan left behind, and I did actually have 5 palettes that I created no pan left behind on, and each one of those gave me 1 point. So I did do the 4 palettes that I talked about in this video. So the Natasha Nona Mini Nude, the Urban Decay Stone Vibes, the Oden's Eye Christmas Eve palette, as well as the WC Rose Quartz palette. Those 4 are completely no pan left behind. And then the 5th one is my Panda palette, which is the Anastasia Soft Glam. So that is 5 points right there. For 10 uses, so I also have a rule that every 10 uses on an eyeshadow gives me a point. And I actually ended up earning 10 points from this category. So I did use the shade Tempera from my Soft Glam palette 20 times. Obviously, maybe more than that, but 10 times even twice. So that's 2 points. I used my Burberry eyeshadow in Rosewood 30 times. I used that as my brow powder. So quite a lot of uses there. So that's 3 points for that eyeshadow. The shade Burnt Orange and Orange Soda from my Soft Glam palette, I both used 10 times each. That's 2 more points for those 2 shades. And same with the shade Sienna and Sultry, again from that palette. I used both of them 10 times each as well. So 2 more points for those 2 eyeshadows. So 1 point to pair those 4 eyeshadows each. And then lastly, we have the Glam Shop shade in Turbo Mielka, which I am panning in my Yellow product pan. I also used that one 10 times, so that is another point there. And again, if I tally that up, that is 10 points, which actually equals 1 eyeshadow, which is really exciting, but that is the points from there. Also in the past month, I did hit 2 pans. I'm not going to tell you what pans those are. Actually, it's hard. Okay, I'm going to tell you because, I mean, you're going to get my little spoil for my Product Level Up now, but I did actually hit a pan from this palette, so that is 1 point. And then I also hit pan on Sultry from Soft Glam, and that is another point, so 2 points for pans. I did not finish any eyeshadows in the past month, so 0 points there. So those are all the points that I've earned. So in total, if you tally that up, that is 17 points, which is pretty good. That is 1.7 eyeshadows that I can now bring in. So that is where I stop. However, I did actually bring in an eyeshadow in my palette in my collection. And if you know, I do not want to get minus from things that I buy myself, but I did not buy this palette. I got it gifted for me from actually one of you lovely subscribers, because backstory is I posted a video in December called All the Eyeshadow Palettes That Live Rent-Free in My Mind, or All the Discontinued Palettes That Live Rent-Free in My Mind. And I was talking about palette in that video, and one of my subscribers reached out to me and said, hey, I'm decluttering all my eyeshadows from this brand because I don't like them, I don't get along with them, I know you do, and I would love to send you this palette. And I'm so grateful, but she did, and she actually gifted me the Hella palette from Odensai in collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist. So this is the palette right here. It is very, like, not very loved at all. It's almost brand new, and I'm so grateful to have this in my collection now. But obviously that it means that I'm bringing in some points. And I did say if I get gifted anything, that can still be bought in collection, because like that is a gift, but it's still, I'm still going to count the points, but it's going to be allowed to go into the minus. So that's kind of where I'm starting off the year. Not kind of what I plan to, but I would not change it for anything. And Carolyn, if you're watching this, thank you so much for this palette. I am so grateful, and I can't wait to play around with this one. I'm probably going to include this palette in my March roundup, because all of the greens and all of the spring tones. So I think I'm going to include this palette then to play around with more, because I can't wait. But yeah, so this has 16 shades in it, which is 160 points. So that is kind of negative in my collection, but then taking away those 17 points that I earned, we stand at minus 143 points at the moment. So it's something that I'm really going to have to work towards to get out, and that's fine. I mean, again, as long as I finish on 0 points, at least at the end of the year, that's fine by me. Of course, it wasn't really what I was planning for it to happen with this project, but I am so grateful, and I'm very excited to have that palette in my collection. So I don't feel too bad about it, and it just means that I won't be able to buy anything in a while, which I'm fine with, because this is a palette that I wanted anyway. So again, I'm very grateful for that. So those are the points, and that is basically it for the project, apart from obviously the last part, which is going to be introducing my 3 next palettes, which I'm going to do next. So let me show you them. So since we are in February, I do want to roll in some more kind of pinkier, romantic toned palettes. So the first one that I had to bring in was an obvious one, and that is my Natasha Nona Love palette. I was debating to roll in both this one and the Love Notes palette, but I feel like I can't have just like pink tone palette. So I decided to go with this one because it's one that I want to play around with a bit more. So this is what the palette looks like. Yeah, you can see it right here. This is going to be, I don't set the weeks yet, but it's going to be one of the palettes. I'm assuming I'm going to put this in for the week where Valentine's falls, because it is the most pink tone palette that I have. Also in this palette, you can see I have one pan. So since I have a pan in this palette, I'm going to roll that pan in to expand those pans. I'm going to use that eyeshadow 5 times, and that is the shade Commitment. So this is the first palette. I will insert some swatches of the palette here so you can see what it looks like. But again, it's very kind of pink and purple leaning, so I'm really excited to play around with this one and create some looks with this palette. Then the second palette that I have is my Carly Bible palette from Anastasia. This one is, again, it has a lot of kind of pinkier cool tone shades, but it's not as bright pinks as the last one. So it has to have the top row, which is more cool toned, and that's kind of why I want to work on it in winter, because it has those cool tones. But it also has the second row, which is more warm tones, but again, it has those pinkier tones, which is why I think it falls really nicely into February. So again, I will have some footage rolling with the swatches so you can see what it looks like. But I think, again, it's going to be a really nice one to work on. And since I don't have any pans in this palette, I won't roll anything in to expand those pans. It's only going to be from the Love palette so far. So yeah, that is the second palette. The final palette that I'm rolling in is one of my Pat McGrath palettes, and the one that I decided to go with is more like the one that I see as most wintry, because I want to get that one out before we get into the warmer months. So the palette that I decided to go with is the Subliminal palette, which looks like this. Again, I will insert some swatches and the footage of the palette so you can see what it looks like. But yeah, I want to work on this one. It has some really beautiful kind of cool tones and a few blues as well. I wanted to pull this one in because it's very different from the kind of other 2 palettes, and I feel like I'm going to wear a lot of pink looks in the month of February. So this one is going to be one that's going to be nice to switch things up with. So yeah, that is the final palette that I'm rolling in. And again, since I don't have any pans, I can't roll anything in to expand those pans from this palette either. So I'm again just going to have one shade in that project, which is the shade from the Love palette. But there you guys, that's it for this video. Let me know how you think of this format of doing it. Obviously, I have a lot of information in each update, especially considering that I use, you know, every single palette a lot, and I rank them, and I do looks with them. I have to go for each look, all of that kind of stuff. So now these updates are going to be a bit longer, but let me know if you want any changes in the format of this and anything else like that. So I hope you enjoyed this update, and I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye guys.